I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congressman Mark Takano. Congressman, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure, Brittany.
In the wake of a school shooting in Nashville that killed 3 students and 3 adults, you, along with your colleagues, Senator Ed Markey and Representatives Elissa Slotkin and Marilyn Strickland, introduced the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act. Can you give us a little highlight about the legislation?
So, Brittany, I'm really pleased to be here. The legislation, in short, that I'm authoring along with Elissa Slotkin and Marilyn Strickland and Senator Markey, has to do with increasing the funding and continuing the funding for the Center for Disease Control to research more deeply the causes of gun violence in our country. It's a uniquely American phenomenon. The numbers of Americans that are dying by gun violence and the numbers of young people is just astronomical. And this is one thing I think that we can get Democrats and Republicans to agree on, that we must have a more laser-focused understanding on what is driving this gun violence in America.
I do want to talk about the bipartisan nature, hopefully, of this bill, but something that you said, this is a uniquely American phenomenon. This is not the first time you used the phrase uniquely. This is what you said about the bill in the past. As a country, we must seek to understand why this violence is rampant and further research why America is uniquely experiencing a crisis of this magnitude. Why do you think this is unique to America?
Well, as someone I believe was very clear-eyed about it, we have a fascination, a kind of fetish for weapons in our country. And why it is, I don't think that enough Americans or enough members of Congress or even that there's just not a broad understanding or a consensus about what is the cause of this. There are maybe historical reasons for this. There's the Second Amendment, of course, the structure of our laws, the way that there's a deeply embedded conviction among many Americans that they have a right to own weapons. But the idea that people would not just own weapons, but weapons that can kill mass numbers of people, automatic weapons. This sort of, this goes beyond defending hearth and home. This goes beyond hunting. There is, in my view, a level of irrationality in terms of the level of gun ownership, just the kinds of guns that people want to own. Now, my point of view, obviously, is is shared by many, but not by all, and we're very polarized and divided over this. But I don't want to overstate that either. Overwhelming numbers of Americans, 80% or more, say they want better laws. They want universal background checks. They want to see loopholes in the law which allow people to buy these extraordinary weapons at gun shows. They want all these things closed, but we haven't, as a political system, been able to get to that point. The people who believe strongly in gun ownership and the ownership of very destructive weaponry, they have an outsized voice. But there are, beyond the ability of us to get the political system to work on behalf of the people, we have, I think, a duty to try to come to consensus with each other on to find common ground where we can. And where I think we can find common ground is let's research objectively. Let's use the power of science to understand gun violence more. Let's study it deeply. And an example of this might be, we can see patterns in terms of who is behind or who is involved in mass shootings. But mass shootings aren't just the only thing we need to study. Mass shootings constitute just a really small minority of the number of gun deaths in our country. Way more Americans just die from other kinds of gun violence episodes.
Something that you said that stuck out to me was you want to find common ground. I spoke with Senator Ed Markey, and he said the same thing. And he really thinks that this legislation, at least the research portion, Republicans can get on board with. He said this about the legislation: if people are afraid of the research, they're afraid of what the consequences would be. What do you think those consequences of the research will be? What do you think Senator Markey meant by this?
Well, Senator Markey, I don't want to get inside Senator Markey's head and put words into, attribute words to him. Let me just speak for myself. I mean, the research could tell us the centrality of the easy availability of guns, and that the solution might involve somehow restricting access to assault weapons. That could be a conclusion, but I don't think we should jump ahead of the research. I think we should fund the research. The research may tell us other things. It may tell us ways in which we can address teenagers and preteens, and that there are things about the maturation process, the emotional maturation, the mental maturation of young people, and how that relates to gun possession, how that relates to the access of weaponry. We may be able to fashion public policy in very strategic, laser-focused ways in which we, find a way to live with the Second Amendment, but the science may give us the tools to fashion laws which are, far more focused and not overly broad, which is maybe something which may enable us to find more common ground with one another.
This legislation would fund the CDC $50 million each fiscal year for the next 5 years. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of time for research. Do you think more legislation will be born out of this research?
I think very well. I mean, often the precursor to good legislation is information, is data, is analysis. I can remember in 2016, being on the floor with John Lewis out of frustration. Mr. Lewis and my friends, David Cicilline and Catherine Clark, who is now our Democratic whip, they began a sit-in, and I began to live stream that sit-in from my phone after the Republicans turned off the lights. Democrats were just so frustrated. And why were we frustrated? The nation had just seen and witnessed this horrific Orlando shooting at the Pulse nightclub. I had forgotten that was the impetus, because since then we have seen so many more shootings, mass shootings. And there have been other shootings across the country which don't even make the news because they're not mass shootings. But the truth is, most Americans who die of gun violence are dying not of mass shootings. They're dying from shootings that happen on a routine basis all across the country. But I remember learning that there was an impediment to even research. The law since 1996 had prohibited research from even being done at the Centers for Disease Control. And it wasn't until the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress in 2020 through the appropriations process that the CDC received $100 million, I think, over 5 years. I might have that number wrong, but there was a restoration of funding in 2020. What our legislation seeks to do is to increase that to $50,000 per year over 5 years. That's $250 million. And I think, this is this is what is possible in the moment. We've already done it once in 2020. So I believe we have a good shot at being able to get this done this year.